18 months ago, I quietly transferred my grandparents' $3 million estate into an irrevocable charitable trust, not to keep it for myself, but to demolish every scheme of something people call family. Last week, they came. With fake smiles, honeyed words, and eyes gleaming with undisguised greed. But I was ready. I was ready to deliver a lesson about betrayal. A lesson that the law would validate. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. I knew who it would be before I even checked the peephole. Through the small glass circle, I could see Eleanor clutching a box of cookies, the kind from that overpriced boutique bakery downtown. Victor stood ramrod straight beside her, shoulders squared like he was preparing for a major business negotiation. And Chloe, my half-sister, stood slightly behind them, eyes glued to her phone screen, her mouth twisted in that familiar expression of perpetual dissatisfaction. I opened the door slowly, deliberately. The hinges creaked, a sound that seemed to stretch out the moment. Eleanor's face immediately arranged itself into what she probably thought was maternal warmth. It looked more like someone had told her to smile for a photograph she didn't want to be in. Sophia. Sweetheart, Mom and Dad have missed you so much. Her voice dripped with sugar, so thick and cloying it made my teeth ache. She thrust the cookie box toward me like it was a peace offering. Like a $15 box of baked goods could somehow make up for 18 years of calculated indifference. I glanced past her to Chloe, who had finally looked up from her phone. She was surveying the entryway of my home with barely concealed interest, her eyes cataloging every detail, every piece of furniture, every hint of value. It's been a while, hasn't it? Her tone was flat, almost bored. This house, though, it's nice. I guess you've done well for yourself. The way she said it, with that slight emphasis on "you've done well," made it clear she thought none of this success had anything to do with my own efforts. To her, to all of them, I was simply the recipient of an undeserved windfall. Money that should have been distributed more fairly, more democratically, more in their favor. They swept into my home without waiting for an actual invitation. Victor's eyes immediately began their assessment, a practice scan that I'd seen him use in his real estate dealings. He'd make a great poker player if his face didn't betray so much calculation. Eleanor cooed over the artwork on my walls, the vintage Persian rug in the living room, the custom-built bookshelves my grandfather had commissioned. Every compliment felt like an appraisal. Every word of praise actually a mental calculation of resale value. Please, sit down. I gestured to the living room, keeping my voice neutral, almost cordial. They arranged themselves on my couch with the kind of careful positioning that suggested they'd planned this visit like a military operation. Eleanor in the center, Victor to her right. Chloe sprawled on the left with studied casualness. Victor reached into his leather briefcase and withdrew a folder. The logo of Prestige Coastal Properties gleamed from the cover. He didn't open it, didn't explain it, just placed it deliberately on my coffee table between us. His eyes met mine with an expression that was probably meant to be meaningful, significant. Instead, it just looked predatory. I know what they want, I thought, settling into the armchair across from them. I've known what they wanted since the moment Grandma called me 18 months ago. Her voice weak but urgent on the phone. They don't need to say it out loud. The folder says it all. But they don't know what I've prepared for them. They don't know that the gift I have waiting will be nothing like what they imagine. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut. Eleanor kept glancing between me and Victor, clearly waiting for someone to break the ice, to move this performance to its next act. Chloe had returned to her phone, thumbs flying over the screen, but I could see her eyes flicking up every few seconds. Watching. Waiting. Before we continue, let me tell you how we got here. Let me tell you about the real story. The one that matters. The one they'd prefer to forget. I was 15 years old when my parents decided I was inconvenient. They called it sending me to a better school environment. They called it giving me opportunities they couldn't provide. They dressed it up in the language of sacrifice and parental concern. But the truth was simpler and crueler. I was an obstacle, a reminder of their first marriage, a complication in the new life they were building with Chloe. Their golden child, the daughter who fit their image of success. I still remember that day with crystalline clarity. It was a Saturday morning in October. The leaves were turning gold and crimson, and there was that sharp autumn smell in the air. The one that promises change whether you want it or not. Victor loaded my 2 suitcases into the trunk of his BMW. Eleanor stood in the doorway, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. But her mascara remained perfect, unsmudged. Chloe, then only 8 years old, watched from an upstairs window with the kind of blank expression children have when they know something important is happening, but don't fully understand what. We drove for 3 hours up the coast to my grandparents' house. The Hawthorne estate. They called it, though Grandma always laughed at the pretension of that name. It's just a house. Sweetheart, she'd say. A house is just wood and windows. It's the people inside that make it a home. Victor didn't come inside when we arrived. He carried my suitcases to the front porch, exchanged brief, stiff words with my grandfather, and left. He didn't hug me goodbye. He didn't tell me he loved me. He didn't promise to visit soon. He just got back in his car and drove away. And I stood there on that porch feeling like a package that had been successfully delivered to its destination. Eleanor had already left that morning, citing an important meeting she couldn't miss. Looking back, I realized there was no meeting. She just couldn't face even the pretense of a goodbye. But my grandparents, Thomas and Margaret Hawthorne, they saved me. That first night, Grandma made her famous pot roast. The one with the carrots that melted on your tongue and the gravy that was basically heaven in liquid form. Grandpa showed me to my room, the guest room that would become mine, and told me that as long as they were alive, I would always have a home, always have family, always have love. They didn't just take me in. They embraced me. They attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game. When I got my driver's license, Grandpa taught me to drive in his old Chevy truck, laughing when I ground the gears and praising me when I finally got it right. When I struggled with calculus, Grandma hired a tutor and sat with me through the sessions, bringing cookies and encouragement in equal measure. They paid for my college education at Berkeley. They drove 8 hours to attend my graduation, sitting in the stadium for 3 hours just to watch me walk across that stage for 30 seconds. They were there for my first heartbreak, my first job, my first apartment. They were my family in every way that mattered. Victor and Eleanor were not. In the 7 years I lived with my grandparents before college, my parents visited exactly 4 times. 4 times in 7 years. Each visit was brief, awkward, filled with forced conversation and long silences. They never asked about my life, my dreams, my struggles. They asked about the house, about the property values in the area, about my grandparents' financial planning. Then, about 2 years ago, the calls started. Not to me, to my grandparents. Victor began calling regularly, at first pretending concern about their health, but quickly pivoting to questions about the estate. Had they considered selling? Did they know how much the property had appreciated? Wouldn't it be smarter to liquidate and invest in something more manageable? I didn't know about these calls until later. Until that afternoon when Grandma phoned me at work, her voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. Sophia, dear, I need you to come up this weekend if you can. Your grandfather and I, we need to talk to you about something important. I left work early that Friday, drove up the coastal highway with my heart heavy with unnamed dread. When I arrived, I found them both in the sunroom, the one with windows overlooking the ocean. The evening light was painting everything gold and amber, but their faces were grave. Your father has called 5 times in the last month, Grandma said without preamble. She was twisting her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit I'd never seen her display before. He's asking about the value of the estate, about selling the house, about our financial plans. He hasn't asked how we are, hasn't asked about our health. Just the money. The property. Grandpa's jaw was tight. He placed his coffee cup down with enough force that it rattled in its saucer. He doesn't see the memories here. The life we built. He sees dollar signs. That's all. And I'll be damned if I let this place become a battleground after we're gone. Your grandmother and I. We've talked about this at length. Sophia. We don't want our legacy torn apart by greed. That's when they told me about the plan. About the trust. About ensuring that the house, the estate, everything they'd built, would go to someone who actually valued it for what it was, not just what it could be sold for. Charlotte Reed arrived an hour later. She was a family law attorney they'd worked with before. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect. She spread documents across the dining room table and explained everything in clear, precise language. We're going to establish an irrevocable trust, she said. The estate will transfer to Sophia upon your deaths, but it will be held in a trust that cannot be challenged or broken. Your son will have no legal ground to contest it. The medical records we've compiled show you're both of sound mind. We'll video record your testimony. This will be airtight. I remember sitting there, overwhelmed. I didn't want to think about my grandparents dying. I didn't want to imagine a world without them. But they were insistent, and their reasoning was sound. They'd seen what happened in families where estates were disputed, where siblings and children fought over inheritance like dogs over scraps. They were determined their legacy wouldn't end that way. It took 3 months to set everything up properly. Charlotte was meticulous, documenting every step, ensuring every clause was ironclad. My grandparents recorded video testimonies explaining their decision, their reasons, their complete mental competency. Medical evaluations were done. Every potential challenge was anticipated and blocked. The trust was established in January, about a month before Grandpa had his first stroke. He recovered mostly, but it slowed him down, made him more thoughtful, more aware of mortality. Grandma's health began declining that summer. Diabetes complications, heart issues, the accumulated weight of 83 years of life. They died within 2 months of each other last year. Grandpa went first, quietly in his sleep one October morning. Grandma followed on a cold December afternoon, sitting in her favorite chair, looking out at the ocean. I was holding her hand when she passed. Her last words to me were, "Remember who loved you." I do, Grandma. Every single day. I remember. The funeral was small, dignified, exactly what they'd wanted. Victor and Eleanor attended, of course, dressed in expensive black, their faces arranged in appropriate expressions of grief. Chloe came too, checking her phone during the service until Eleanor elbowed her sharply. They didn't cry. They didn't share memories. They stood there like actors hired to play mourners, waiting for their scene to end. The calls started within a week. Victor's voice on my voicemail, carefully controlled but with an edge of impatience underneath. "Sophia, we need to discuss the estate settlement. There are financial matters to address. Call me back as soon as possible. This is important." Then Eleanor, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Sweetheart, I know this is a difficult time, but we really do need to talk about the inheritance. It's only fair that everything is divided properly among family. That's what your grandparents would have wanted, I'm sure." Chloe sent texts. "Yo, we need to talk about the house and stuff. Obviously, this should be split equally between all of us. That's the right thing to do. Also, I'm having some financial issues right now and could really use my share as soon as possible." I didn't respond. Not immediately. I let them stew for 2 weeks. Let their calls and messages accumulate. Then I sent a single email to all 3 of them, attaching a copy of the trust documents Charlotte had prepared. The response was volcanic. Victor called 17 times in one day. When I finally answered, his voice had lost all pretense of control. "What the hell is this? Sophia? A trust? Everything goes to you? This can't be legal. They weren't in their right minds. We're contesting this. Eleanor left a voicemail that started with tears and ended with threats. How could you manipulate them like this? They were old. Vulnerable. You took advantage. We'll fight this in court. You won't get away with this betrayal of family. Chloe's message was shorter and more direct. You bitch. You absolute bitch. We're going to sue you for everything. They hired a lawyer. A man named Robert Hutchins, who specialized in estate disputes. He reviewed the trust documents, examined the medical records, watched the video testimonies. Then he told them exactly what Charlotte had promised me he would say. This is airtight. The trust is completely legal. Your parents were demonstrably of sound mind. If you challenge this in court and lose, which you will, you'll forfeit the $50,000 they left you in a separate provision. I advise against proceeding. They ignored him and hired another lawyer. Same result. Then a third. Each one delivered the same message with increasing bluntness. You have no case. You're wasting money. The trust cannot be broken. The calls stopped about 6 months ago. The angry messages dried up. I thought they'd finally accepted reality. Finally moved on. I should have known better. Then last week, Victor called. His voice was different this time. Softer. More conciliatory. Sophia, I think we all need to take a step back. We've let emotions cloud our judgment. You're family. We're family. I think it's time we sat down together. Talked this through like adults. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. I knew immediately what this meant. They'd shifted tactics. The legal approach had failed. So now came the emotional manipulation. I could have refused the meeting. I could have said no and saved myself the hassle. But I wanted to see them. I wanted to look them in the eyes when I revealed what I'd done. I wanted that moment of realization. That instant, when they understood they'd lost completely and permanently. So I agreed. And that's how we ended up here. In my living room. With Eleanor's cookie box sitting unopened on the side table and Victor's real estate folder positioned like a chess piece on the coffee table. Now, sitting across from them, I watched their performance with the detached fascination of someone observing a play they'd already read. Eleanor launched into her prepared speech, her voice hitting all the right notes of reconciliation and family unity. Sophia. Honey. You've had time to grieve. To process. We all have. But now I think it's time we address the practical matters. The house on the coast. It's just sitting there. It must be costing you a fortune in maintenance and property taxes. The sensible thing would be to sell it. Divide the proceeds fairly. As a family. That's what Mom and Dad would have wanted. For all of us to benefit from what they built. Chloe leaned forward. Her expression earnest in a way that looked practiced. Yeah. Exactly. Fair is fair. We should split everything equally. That's just basic decency. Right? Family should share. Victor picked up the folder from the coffee table and opened it with a flourish. We've already been contacted by a developer. Very reputable firm. They've done preliminary assessments. The property could sell for close to $4 million. Possibly more in the current market. Your share alone would be over $1 million. Sophia. Think about what you could do with that money. Investments. Travel. Whatever you want. I let them finish. I let them lay out their entire pitch. Their carefully constructed argument for why I should voluntarily give up 2/3 of what my grandparents had deliberately given to me alone. When they were done, when the silence stretched out expectantly, I stood up. They watched me walk to my desk in the corner of the room. I could feel their eyes tracking my movement. Confusion and anticipation mixing on their faces. I opened the bottom drawer and withdrew a manila folder. Much thicker than Victor's real estate documents. I think you'll want to see what I've done with my inheritance. I placed the folder on the coffee table, directly on top of Victor's documents. Chloe grabbed it first, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. She pulled out the papers and began reading. I watched her face go through a fascinating transformation. First curiosity, then confusion, then shock, and finally a kind of pale horror that made her skin look waxy in the afternoon light. What? What the hell? She looked up at me, then back at the documents, as if reading them again might change what they said. You set up a charitable trust? With the estate? Exactly. I kept my voice level, almost cheerful. The Hawthorne Foundation. I transferred ownership of the coastal property and the associated assets into a charitable remainder unit trust. I receive 5% of the trust value annually for the rest of my life. When I die, the remainder goes to fund scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing higher education. Victor snatched the folder from Chloe's hands, his movements sharp and aggressive. He read through the documents with increasing desperation, flipping pages faster and faster, as if speed might somehow change the words printed there. You gave it away? You can't do that. This can't be legal. You're the beneficiary of the estate. You can't just transfer it to charity without your permission? I finished for him. Actually, I can. I'm the sole legal owner. The trust my grandparents established gave me complete control. I can do whatever I want with the property, including gifting it to a charitable organization. Charlotte Reed, their attorney, made absolutely certain of that. Eleanor had started crying. Real tears this time. Not the practiced dabs with a tissue. But we're family. We're your family. How could you do this? How could you just give away what should have been shared with all of us? I looked at her. Really looked at her. And felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No guilt. No sadness. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness where those emotions might have lived in someone who'd had a different childhood. Family? I let the word hang in the air. Family is the people who show up when there's no money involved. Family is the people who call to ask how you're doing, not to ask what the property is worth. Family is the people who care. You haven't been my family since I was 15 years old. You don't get to claim that word now. Not when it comes with a price tag attached. Chloe's shock had transformed into fury. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling as she shook the documents at me. You're insane. This is insane. We're going to sue you. We're going to take you to court and prove you're not mentally competent. You've obviously had some kind of breakdown. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Feel free. 3 lawyers have already told you that the original trust is unbreakable. This one is too. I'm the legal owner. I've transferred it legally. You have no standing to claim any rights to property that was never yours in the first place. And Charlotte has already prepared for this possibility. There are medical evaluations, psychiatric assessments, all showing that I'm perfectly sane and acting with full knowledge and consent. The room erupted. All 3 of them started talking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusation and threat. Eleanor was sobbing openly now, her careful makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. Chloe was calling me selfish, cruel, vindictive. Every insult she could think of. Victor had stood up and was pacing, his face red, his hands gesturing wildly as he outlined various legal strategies, none of which would work, and all of which he probably knew were futile. I waited. I stood there calm and centered while the storm raged around me. When there was finally a break in the noise, when they'd exhausted themselves into a momentary silence, I spoke again. And here's the beautiful part. This trust is irrevocable. I can't change it even if I wanted to. So all your manipulation, all your legal threats, they're completely pointless. It's done. It's permanent. Forever. Victor stopped pacing. He turned to face me. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw something in his expression that looked like genuine emotion. It might have been rage. Might have been grief. Might have been the sudden realization that he'd miscalculated catastrophically. You'll regret this. Family is everything. Sophia, You're going to end up alone and bitter. And you'll have no one to blame but yourself. I met his eyes without flinching. Family is everything when they act like family. Grandma and Grandpa Hawthorne were my family. They were the ones who loved me, who raised me, who were there for every important moment of my life. You. I pointed at each of them in turn. You were just people I happened to share DNA with. There's a difference. And you taught me that difference when you dropped me off at their house and drove away without looking back. Chloe made one more attempt. She softened her voice, tried for a different angle. Sophia. Come on. I was just a kid when all that happened. It wasn't my fault. We're sisters. Doesn't that mean anything? It might have, I said quietly. If you'd ever acted like a sister. If you'd called me even once just to talk. If you'd invited me to your college graduation, your birthday parties, your life. But you didn't. The only time I've heard from you in the last decade is when you wanted something. Money. Usually. So no. Being sisters doesn't mean anything. Because you never gave it the chance to mean anything. They left without another word. Eleanor grabbed her cookie box with a violence that crushed the packaging. The door slammed hard enough to rattle a picture frame on the wall. I heard Victor's car start up in the driveway, tires squealing slightly as he accelerated away. And then there was silence. Beautiful. Complete silence. I sat down in my armchair and let myself shake. Adrenaline was flooding my system, making my hands tremble and my heart race. But underneath the physical reaction was something else. Peace. Satisfaction. The bone-deep certainty that I'd done exactly the right thing. Later that evening, I drove up to the coastal house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed almost artificial in their beauty. The old Victorian stood against that backdrop like something from a painting, its windows reflecting the last light of day. I walked through Grandma's rose garden. The bushes needed pruning, I noted. I'd have to call the gardener. The ocean breeze was sharp and salty, carrying the smell of seaweed and home. I sat on the porch swing, the one Grandpa had built 40 years ago, and looked out at the water. The Hawthorne Foundation had awarded its first scholarship last month. $5,000 to an environmental law student named Sarah. Her thank you letter had arrived the week before, and I'd read it 3 times. Your generosity has changed my life. I'm the first person in my family to attend college. I'm going to make you proud. I cried then, sitting on that porch swing with the sunset fading and the stars beginning to emerge. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of pride, of the profound rightness of seeing my grandparents' legacy go to someone who would appreciate it, who would use it to build something meaningful. This isn't revenge, I said to the empty air, to the house, to the memory of 2 people who'd loved me unconditionally. This is protection. This is honoring you. This is making sure that what you built goes to people who deserve it, not people who only see dollar signs. Victor and Eleanor will probably hire more lawyers. They'll hear the same answer they've heard before. Sophia Hawthorne is the legal owner. She transferred the property legally. You have no standing to challenge this decision. End of story. Because here's the truth they never understood and never will. My grandparents knew exactly who their son was. They saw his greed, his calculation, his complete inability to value anything that couldn't be converted to cash. And they made absolutely certain that their life's work wouldn't end up in his hands. I stood up from the swing and walked to the railing, looking out at the ocean. The water was dark now, reflecting the emerging stars. Somewhere out there, past the horizon, was a future full of possibilities. Scholarships would be awarded. Lives would be changed. Young people with dreams and determination would get chances they might never have had otherwise. And Victor, Eleanor, and Chloe would get exactly what they deserved, nothing. I drove home that night with the windows down, the ocean air whipping through the car. The radio was playing something upbeat and meaningless, and I sang along badly. not caring how I sounded. When I got home, I made myself dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat down to watch a movie I'd been meaning to see. My phone rang 3 times. Victor. Eleanor. Chloe. I let every call go to voicemail. I didn't listen to the messages. There was nothing they could say that I needed to hear. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run along the beach near my house. The sun was just rising, turning the water gold. Other runners passed me, offering friendly nods. A dog bounded past, chasing a tennis ball its owner had thrown. It was an ordinary morning. A beautiful, ordinary morning in a life that was entirely mine. Built on a foundation that 2 extraordinary people had given me. A foundation of love. Not money. Of presence. Not presents. Of showing up. Day after day. Year after year. Because that's what family does. That evening, I had dinner with Charlotte Reed. We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown. The kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her in her lawyer mode. "So," she said, raising her wine glass. "How did it go?" "Exactly as you predicted." I clinked my glass against hers. They were shocked. Angry. Threatened lawsuits. Called me every name they could think of. "And how do you feel?" I thought about it. Really considered the question. "Free. I feel free." She smiled. "That's what your grandmother hoped." Margaret called me about a month before she died. She made me promise to make sure you were okay. To make sure you didn't let guilt manipulate you into undoing what she and Thomas had worked so hard to create. She was very specific about that. I felt tears prick my eyes. She knew they'd try this. Of course she knew. She knew her son. She loved him. But she saw him clearly. Without illusions. And she loved you more than anything in the world. She wanted you protected. Happy. And free to live your life without the weight of their expectations and demands. We finished dinner. Talking about other things. Easier things. Charlotte told me about her own family. About the challenges of balancing work and life. About a vacation she was planning to Greece. Normal conversation. The kind you have with friends. Not just your lawyer. When we parted ways outside the restaurant, she hugged me. "Your grandparents chose well when they chose you. Sophia. Don't ever doubt that." Months have passed since that confrontation in my living room. The attempts at contact from Victor, Eleanor, and Chloe have dwindled and finally stopped. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that they've moved on to other schemes. Other plans. Other sources of hoped-for income. The Hawthorne Foundation is thriving. We've awarded 3 more scholarships this year. An aspiring engineer from a rural community. A nursing student who aged out of foster care. A young woman studying marine biology who wants to focus on ocean conservation. Each of them sent thank you letters that I've kept in a special folder. Reading them when I need a reminder of why I did what I did. I visit the coastal house every few weeks. I've hired a property management company to maintain it. And they've done excellent work. The rose garden is flourishing. The paint is fresh. The house looks loved. Which it is. Sometimes I stay overnight. Sleeping in my old room. The one that became mine when I was 15. I wake up to the sound of waves and seabirds and feel my grandparents' presence so strongly it's almost physical. I talk to them sometimes. Telling them about the foundation. About the students we're helping. About the legacy they've created. "I think you'd be proud," I say to the empty room. To the morning light filtering through the curtains. "I think you'd love knowing that this house, this place that meant so much to you, is changing lives even after you're gone." Last week, I received an invitation in the mail. Chloe is getting married. The envelope was formal. Expensive. The kind of wedding invitation that costs $5 per piece. There was no personal note. Just the printed details. Date. Time. Location. A destination wedding in Cabo. Naturally. I wondered briefly if I was invited as a genuine gesture, or if it was some kind of test. Or perhaps just a pro forma acknowledgement that we're technically related. I won't be attending. I wrote a polite card, declining the invitation, and sent a modest gift. A set of nice wine glasses from their registry. It felt like the right balance. Acknowledging the event without pretending we have a relationship we don't. My life is good now. Better than good. I have meaningful work. A career I built myself. I have friends who care about me for who I am. Not what I have. I have a home I love. A life that feels authentic and true. And I have the knowledge that my grandparents' legacy is secure. Protected. And serving a purpose they would have approved of wholeheartedly. People sometimes ask me if I regret my decision. If I wish I'd compromised. If I think I was too harsh. The answer is always no. What I did wasn't revenge. Though I won't lie and say the justice of it didn't feel satisfying. What I did was protect something precious from people who would have destroyed it without a second thought. You can't abandon someone and then show up years later demanding your share of what they've inherited. You can't ignore a person's entire life and then claim family ties when money is involved. That's not how love works. That's not how family works. My grandparents understood that. They spent the last years of their lives making absolutely certain that their wishes would be honored. That their legacy would go where they wanted it to go. They saw the situation clearly and acted decisively to prevent exactly the kind of conflict that would have torn less prepared families apart. I'm simply honoring their wishes and protecting myself in the process. That's not cruelty. That's survival. That's self-respect. That's recognizing that some relationships are toxic and the only winning move is not to play. Today is Thursday. The sun is shining. And I have the afternoon off. I'm going to drive up to the coastal house. Walk on the beach. Maybe do some work in the garden. I'll have dinner at that little seafood place in town. The one where Grandpa always ordered the clam chowder and Grandma insisted on getting the fish and chips. And I'll go to bed tonight knowing that I did the right thing. Not the easy thing. Not the thing that makes everyone comfortable, but the right thing. The thing that honors the people who loved me, protects the legacy they built, and ensures that their generosity continues to change lives long after they're gone. That's what family legacy should be. Not money hoarded and fought over, but values lived out and passed forward. Not wealth accumulated and divided, but love multiplied and shared with those who need it most. Victor, Eleanor, and Chloe will never understand that. They'll probably go to their graves thinking I wronged them, that I stole what was rightfully theirs. But I've made my peace with their perception of me. I don't need their approval or their understanding. I have something better. I have my grandparents' love. Even though they're gone. I have the satisfaction of seeing their dreams realized. I have the letters from students whose lives are changing because two people decided to love a abandoned 15-year-old girl with everything they had. And I have myself. Whole and free and unburdened by guilt over boundaries I needed to set and decisions I had to make. That's more than enough. That's everything. So this is my story. Not a tale of revenge, but a story about protection, about honor, about ensuring that good people's good intentions result in good outcomes. It's about learning that sometimes the people who share your blood aren't your family, and the people who aren't related to you at all can be the family you need most. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. About understanding that you can't reason with greed or negotiate with entitlement. About recognizing that some people will only ever see you as a means to an end. And those people don't deserve access to your life or your legacy. Most importantly, it's about understanding that you don't owe anything to people who've never given you anything. Not your money. Not your time. Not your energy. And certainly not your peace of mind. I learned these lessons the hard way. Through years of hoping for change that never came. Through disappointments and realizations that stung like salt in wounds. But I learned them. And now I'm living them. The Hawthorne Foundation will continue for decades. Maybe centuries if it's managed well. Students will receive opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. Lives will be transformed. Dreams will be realized. And somewhere, I like to think, my grandparents are smiling. That's the legacy they wanted. That's the legacy I'm protecting. And no amount of anger, threats, or manipulation from people who never really loved me will ever change that. I sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if I'd given in. If I'd let guilt or social pressure or the hollow promise of family reconciliation convince me to sell the house and split the money, I'd be richer in the short term. Certainly. But I'd also be complicit in destroying something beautiful. Something meaningful. Something that represented every good value my grandparents embodied. I'd wake up every morning knowing I'd betrayed the people who saved me. I'd see Victor and Eleanor and Chloe spending money they didn't earn on things they don't need. And I'd know I facilitated that. I'd have their approval. Perhaps. But I'd have lost my self-respect in the bargain. That trade was never worth making. It will never be worth making. 3 months ago, I attended the scholarship award ceremony we held for our recipients. It was small, intimate, held at a community center near the coast. Sarah, our first recipient, was there. She'd completed her first year of law school with a 3.8 gigapascals. She gave a short speech about what the scholarship meant to her, how it had allowed her to focus on her studies instead of working 3 jobs, how it had given her hope that her dreams were achievable. I sat in the back of the room and cried through her entire speech. These were the good tears. The ones that come from witnessing something pure and right in a world that often feels neither. This was what my grandparents had worked their entire lives to build. Not money for its own sake, but opportunity, hope, transformation. After the ceremony, Sarah came up to me. She didn't know who I was. Not really. The foundation deliberately keeps my involvement low profile to avoid making it about me rather than the recipients. But she thanked me anyway. Thanked all of taking, us who'd made the foundation possible. Your family must have been incredible people, she said. To create something like this. To think about students like me. People they'd never meet. That's real generosity. That's real love. She was right. That is what real love looks like. Not the performative kind. Not the conditional kind. But the kind that gives without expecting anything in return. The kind that sees a need and meets it. The kind that thinks about future generations and works to make their lives better. Victor and Eleanor never understood that kind of love. They loved conditionally. Transactionally. They loved what people could do for them. Not who people were. Chloe learned from their example. And the cycle continued. But I learned from different teachers. I learned from 2 people who showed me every single day that love is a verb. An action. A choice you make over and over again. They chose me. They chose to love me. To invest in me. To build something lasting that would protect and provide for me even after they were gone. Honoring that love. Protecting that legacy. That's not revenge. That's gratitude. That's respect. That's love returned in the only way I can still give it. I started keeping a journal about 6 months ago. My therapist suggested it. Said it might help me process everything that's happened. At first I was skeptical. I've never been much for writing about feelings. But I found it helpful. Particularly on the hard days. Because there are hard days. Days when I question my decisions. When I wonder if I could have handled things differently. When the loneliness of being effectively orphaned by my living parents hits me harder than usual. On those days, I write. I remind myself of why I made the choices I made. I reread letters from scholarship recipients. I look at photos of my grandparents. And I remember that being alone is not the same as being lonely. I have a community now, built by choice rather than obligation. I have friends who celebrate my successes and support me through challenges. I have work that matters and gives my life purpose. I have a home that feels safe and peaceful. What I don't have is drama. I don't have people calling to ask for money. I don't have relatives showing up when they need something and disappearing when they don't. I don't have the constant low-grade stress of managing toxic relationships that drain more than they give. The absence of those things is not a loss. It's a gain. Last month, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. Someone who'd known my parents and grandparents for decades. She asked how everyone was doing. and I gave her the abbreviated version. When I mentioned that I wasn't in contact with Victor and Eleanor anymore, her face fell. Oh, Sophia. That's so sad. Family is so important. Maybe you should reach out. Try to rebuild those bridges. Life is too short for estrangement. I smiled politely and changed the subject. But I thought about her words for days afterward. Because she's not wrong that life is short. She's just wrong about what that means. Life is too short to waste on people who don't value you. Life is too short to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Life is too short to sacrifice your peace, your principles, and your self-respect in the name of maintaining relationships that were never healthy to begin with. Bridge building is admirable when both sides are willing to do the work, to acknowledge harm, to change behavior, to invest in genuine reconciliation. But when one side just wants access to resources they feel entitled to, that's not bridge building. That's enabling. That's self-harm disguised as virtue. I chose differently. I chose self-preservation. I chose to honor the people who actually loved me over appeasing the ones who didn't. And every day that passes confirms that it was the right choice. The property management company called last week. There's some maintenance needed on the house. Some repairs to the roof and the deck. It's going to cost about $30,000. I approved the work immediately. That house is worth every penny spent to maintain it. It's not just a building. It's a monument to love, to resilience, to the life my grandparents built together over more than 50 years. When the work is done, I'm planning to spend a weekend there. Maybe I'll invite some friends. Show them this place that means so much to me. We'll cook in Grandma's kitchen. Sit on the porch watching the sunset. Walk on the beach in the morning. We'll make new memories in a place that's saturated with old ones. And I'll tell them the story. Not the version I've told here. Not the detailed chronicle of betrayal and justice. Just the important parts. That this house belonged to my grandparents. The people who raised me and loved me. That they wanted their legacy to do good in the world. That we're all part of that legacy now. In our own ways. Because that's what matters in the end. Not the money. Not the property values. Not who got what in the inheritance. What matters is whether we live in a way that honors the best parts of the people who shaped us. What matters is whether we pass forward the love we received, multiplying it rather than hoarding it. My grandparents taught me that, not through lectures or demands, but through their daily actions, their choices, their unwavering commitment to building something larger than themselves. Victor never learned that lesson. Eleanor didn't either. They spent their lives accumulating, calculating, positioning themselves for maximum advantage. And in the end, what did it get them? Comfortable lives. Perhaps. But also a daughter who wants nothing to do with them and a legacy that will die when they do. I have something different. I have the knowledge that long after I'm gone, the Hawthorne Foundation will continue changing lives. I have letters from students who'll remember my grandparents' generosity for the rest of their lives. I have the satisfaction of knowing I did right by the people who did right by me. That's wealth that can't be measured in dollars. That's the kind of inheritance that actually matters. Sometimes. Late at night. I imagine what I'd say if Victor or Eleanor or Chloe actually acknowledged what they did. If they apologized genuinely, without excuses or justifications. If they took real responsibility for their choices and their treatment of me, I don't know what I'd say. Part of me wants to believe I'd be gracious, forgiving, willing to cautiously rebuild some kind of relationship. But the truth is, I'm not sure I want to. Some wounds heal, but they leave scars. Some bridges burn completely, and trying to rebuild them just means standing in the ashes of what can never be recovered. Maybe that makes me harsh. Maybe it makes me unforgiving. But it also makes me honest. I'm not going to pretend to want a relationship I don't want. I'm not going to perform forgiveness I don't feel. I'm not going to sacrifice my peace for the appearance of family harmony that never actually existed. What I will do is continue living my life on my terms, building my own family through choice and connection rather than obligation and biology. I'll continue protecting the legacy my grandparents entrusted to me. I'll continue supporting students who need a chance, a hope, a hand up. And I'll do it all without guilt, without second guessing, without wondering if I should have chosen differently. Because here's what I finally learned. What it took me years to truly understand. You don't owe your life to people who abandoned you. You don't owe your inheritance to people who only wanted you for what you could give them. You don't owe your peace to people who never considered yours. What you owe is to yourself. To live authentically. To honor the people who genuinely loved you. To protect what they built. To continue their legacy in the way they intended. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'll keep doing. And if that makes me the villain in their story, I'm entirely at peace with that. The truth is more powerful than their narrative. The law is on my side. The moral high ground is mine. And most importantly, the love that built all of this. The foundation on which everything rests. That was real and true and unconditional. You can't buy that. You can't sue for it. You can't manipulate or threaten your way into it. And you certainly can't have it if you never valued it in the first place. My name is Sophia Hawthorne. I'm 33 years old. I'm the granddaughter of Thomas and Margaret Hawthorne, two of the finest people who ever lived. I'm the administrator of a charitable foundation that will change lives for generations to come. And I'm someone who learned, finally and completely, that family is what you make it, not what you're born into. This is my story. This is my truth. This is my justice. And I'm done apologizing for it.